Thanks for having us as a Blockchain Bundesverband here on stage. And let me maybe give a short 30-second intro why we are sitting here. We've been discussing quite a lot over the past year, and sometimes we agree to disagree. But we think that it's important to talk. And now with the changing, let's say, global environment, it's especially important to talk constructively about what technology can do and should do, not only for financial and capital markets, but also beyond. So thanks again for still organizing this conference. You've renamed the Frankfurt School Blockchain Center now today. Would you also recommend, by the way, I like your explanation, so I think it's a good move. It makes a lot of sense. Would you recommend us to rename ourselves as well? Should we give up Blockchain Bundesverband and go for something else?
No, I don't think so. I think there's an important role that blockchain plays in the new digital economy, and for that, I think it's important to reflect a little bit on what has blockchain ever done for us, much like in Monty Python, what have the Romans ever done for us? For me, there's two really big things that are easy to overlook, but that are, for me, fundamental to what blockchain has done for us. And let me start with the easier one, that's standardization. For me, I always looked at blockchain more like the internet protocol. There is a way that, interaction between otherwise difficult to bring together entities are facilitated by having a level of standardization. And blockchain does that. The protocol enforces some of that, much like the TCP/IP protocol enforces interoperability and forces that different actors speak the same language. I mean, it's a subtle thing that's easily overlooked, but it's very important that there's something that does that.
If we look at some of the things that happened in our market, we had Catena-X, one of the big industry consortiums, and they basically, in the end, went for an older, let's say, technical standard because there were 3 out of the 27 consortial partners that were blockchain companies, and they said blockchain isn't standardized enough. That was 3.5 years ago. Was that just lazy or managerial reluctance? And are we now further down the road? What's your
I think the internet took 30 years to develop. And there were ups and downs along the way. There were attempts to create a bunch of walled gardens where the internet service providers would set their own standards within their own protocols. And it took, I think, 10, 15 years to overcome this and agree on what are the useful standards. And just because there's somebody saying, oh, this hasn't worked out for us at this point, doesn't change, for me at least, the underlying driving force to enable this interoperability through technology. And that gets me actually to the second point where I think blockchain adds unique value that nothing else can. And that is as a means to make data unique. Data is the world's most valuable resources at this point. And I have not seen any other, well, maybe oil is giving it a run for its money these days, but let's hope this is temporary. But I've not seen any other technology that you can use that makes data scarce and rival. And if you have any database, there's always a database operator that can copy the data, that can, block you from accessing it. And with blockchain, you don't have that, at least if the blockchain is somewhat well designed. And therefore, you can turn something that was a non-rival good and you make it a rival good. And that, for me, is foundational for creating things that we can't do with other technology.
Getting back to the Frankfurt School Center for Digital Economics, now that you dropped the term blockchain, how do you feel? Because if I look at the German and even European landscape, we still lack deep-rooted blockchain know-how. Is this also a little bit a worry for you that by giving up this specialization that you also give away a bit of an opportunity to create a young cohort of experts? Or do you want to treat all technologies now equally within this digital economics setup, as you showed on your slide this morning?
Oh, the digital economy requires, in my mind, blockchain as an underlying layer to create digital property rights. If we can make data unique and we can create provenance for data, these are 2 preconditions for property rights. At the moment, data does not have property rights, not proper property rights anyways. If you talk to lawyers about that, they struggle to capture data. If you talk to accountants, they struggle to capture data on balance sheets. Why is that? Because we do not have property rights as we have for other goods. Why? because it's not scarce, it's non-rival as of today. With blockchain, we can change that. Therefore, I always think of blockchain as the underpinning of a new digital economy, and that is its key role. And for us, that is still there. I wouldn't call my center now the Center for Digital Payments, because I expect that everybody is building digital payments. What our role is to translate this into more applications. So you asked about the Blockchain Bundesverband. I think it's very important that there are specialized entities that push the technology, because we are hoping, we heard in Silvio's keynote today, hoping to build huge value creation on top of this technology. But I think for a center like us, it is important that we help the translation into adoption, into making this real, not only, quote unquote, pushing on the technology itself.
We agree to agree in this case,
okay, very good.
Which was the purpose of this session. But let's now switch also to governance and European sovereignty. When I listen to all these European sovereignty discussions in Davos and beyond, people were talking about the IoT cloud for European and German business data, which could be a big differentiator towards the B2C AI race that we might have lost here in Europe. Where do you see the value of blockchain tech rails? Where can Europe win if we apply this strategically, cleverly? And where do you see risks? We talked about the financial market today and that it's basically doomed because Europe doesn't play a role, quoting Michael Spitz. But I believe there are certain synergies between industry, between the financial markets, and between also, the public sector. What's your take if you look at Germany and Europe?
I'm actually super optimistic. There is an opportunity in front of us to build an alternative infrastructure where we take European values and use technology to express these values. If we create property rights for data, this is a unique approach. The US approach to data and how data is stored is despotic in the Blackstonian sense. There's somebody who controls the data, they have absolute rights over this data, and as a result of the despotic dominion of data, we only have one concept to deal with data rights, and that is privacy. And privacy is a binary right. I have the right to retain my information or to reveal it, but I would like to have the right to give Joachim some of my data for specific use cases because I know he's gonna do some good stuff with it. It's a much more nuanced set of rights that we can create if we use blockchain in that infrastructure. The American approach to that does not have that. It is not rooted in the ideology, it is not rooted in the technology. I think there's a very unique European opportunity that we shouldn't sort of dismiss, that we express our values through technology, which I think would be a first, because so far we have always ceded to just the United States and their values and how their technology has expressed it. I think this is an opportunity, and I'm actually very hopeful that the challenges ahead, we can put our stamp on it and achieve sovereignty. And I have some thoughts on the word, so you want to hear like one take on this? I think sovereignty is a small step. What we really want is control over data. We want to have these nuanced property rights that allow us to do differentiated things, not just decide to disclose or not disclose. That would be a much richer approach. With that, we can create large digital economies. That is also the vision for the center to build this.
Do you have already some, let's say, headlines or bullet points for us? Which kind of Studiengänge, so classes and courses, will you offer to, drill down?
We have this Master of Financial Technology because I believe the key thing that we need to create is like proper foundational education that is rigorous. My courses, I teach financial platforms and digital economics. It basically is me on a whiteboard doing math, and the students are not allowed to have a laptop in class. And they sit there for 6 hours and we just, engage and talk about math and how we express the world through formal models and what it means and what the limitations are. We will also offer new courses on quantum finance, applications of quantum computing in finance. We still have courses on blockchain itself in the program because I think it is a foundational technology on par with AI, on par with quantum. So that is the lens that we take to it. And I think it's important to not just do sort of continuous learning certificates, but really train students before their minds have been, poisoned, limited by the reality.
Let's talk a little bit about the political sphere as well. If I look here at the walls of Frankfurt School, we see former politicians and former, big peanut bankers here from Frankfurt, and the walls have crumbled down ever since the days of Roland Koch. So where are we today, and how can you make the Center for Digital Economics not just be a economics playground? Should we have more politicians at this conference as well to see and feel?
Oh, first of all, Roland Koch is a very valued colleague who has greatly helped us. So full stop on that. Part of what we want to do is to have that dialogue between policy, which is not politics, but also with politics. We have planned for this year discussions with politicians here to talk about special topics that I care a lot about. I think it's part of a center that we bring all these actors together, and that the policymakers and politicians, I think they need to hear more what the industry has to say. I think you guys are doing a great job in translating in Berlin, but some policy is not made in Berlin. It's made in central banks here. It's made at AMLA. It's made at ESMA, IOPA. There are other institutions that are to be considered, that the European Commission, that we need to bring together. So it's part of what we want to do, to have that dialogue. So for this year, we were very happy to have even more institutions here, even more institutional focus, to have academic keynotes, that have really shaped the field. The next step in this evolution is to then bring the policymakers in as well, which is one of the things for next year that I hope for.
One sentence about blockchains. You mentioned Silvio and his influence, and now, of course, trying to find a way for Algorand. If I look at the top 30 blockchains, many of them are really struggling to find a positioning and a routing in the industry. Maybe not the top 3, but the other ones. So what kind of market consolidation can and should we expect, and how can we help those innovation ecosystems that they still are sometimes? Not talking about the crypto part of it, but about what they can enable technically. So what can we do for them here in Germany to get closer to what is needed by industry and by the public sector?
Yeah, I think a bit of consolidation is good and healthy, but we have seen this. There are some projects that were very visible a few years ago. I'm not going to name anyone, but that aren't visible anymore. Some consortia that were big 5 years ago that aren't on the radar anymore. I think that's good and healthy that we have that competition for the best technology, for the best ecosystem. I think that that is a very healthy thing. With that being said, I think some more consolidation is unavoidable. We need to differentiate the true technology frontier from like the narrative and sort of just pushing this, pushing their own ideas. And I'm not sure if we need as many smart contract platforms as we have, or if there's going to be 2, 3, 5, whatever it is in the future that will compete with one another for the real use cases, where they are the new rails, which now only are Target 2 or Euro 1 or whatever. I think that would be a good outcome if there wasn't like one government chain to rule them all, but where we have a healthy competition and ecosystem, because that is what pushes the technology forward. I would also be much more optimistic then about what Germany can do in order to keep up with the AI race. AI is no longer about who has the most NVIDIA chips. It is who has the best human-generated authentic data. So for me, it comes back to, can we create incentive systems to get good quality human data, to train European AIs that might not suffer from the same biases as OpenAI, that do not suffer from model leaching or model collapse because we have human-generated data. That provenance layer that blockchain can provide in that whole value stack, I think, again, that's an amazing original European opportunity that other systems don't easily seize.
Yeah, fully agree again. My last question would be, if we now think about 2027 and the next crypto assets conference, or maybe a new and different title, we will have seen, let's say, Pontus and the wholesale digital euro coming into effect. There will be most likely tremendous progress on the payment side, also for agentic AI. Quantum is still a little bit down the road, but what is your feeling? Which of those technologies will have the biggest impact, and where do we need to be careful in Europe if we talk about tech orchestration, because that's what's sometimes forgotten. There's AI versus blockchain, but it all has to come together to form the backend of the future.
Yeah, I think one of the trends right now is this whole agentic wallet, agentic personal advisor. We have several discussions with large financial institutions in Frankfurt that all want to build the same thing. Seems to be a strong indication that, you know, either there was one memo that everybody got what we should do, or actually there's something there and we want to build these wallets to achieve interoperability, to, you know, use the data that you generate through this wallet to train your personal AI to actually then benefit from the open banking approach that we have with PSD2, which is, again, I think it's a positive thing. So that's one of the trends. I think that we have moved for tokenization beyond, oh, would be nice to have, to what are the missing one or two things for real world assets to really kick off. So that's, I think, going to be a trend. As I said, quantum is a little bit down the road, but this is a looming thing where we need to wrap our heads around to actually come up with not just tech solutions. It's not a tech challenge. It's primarily a management challenge. The technology, what we have to do for hardware cryptography, that's all there. It's a question of how do we then get our highly interdependent systems to update at the same time on the same standard. That, I think, is a real challenge that will probably stick with us. And the last one is this whole question of what if we do a digital euro and nobody's going to use it? And I think that is a real, maybe threat is the wrong word, but that's a real possibility that I think central banks need to be very, cognizant of. I'm looking forward to John's take, who has been the chronicler of CBDC's rise and possible demise, question mark. I don't know yet. I haven't seen all your slides, but I think that is a very open question. Like, what is it that we want of a digital euro? And what I hope to get out of it is that it's something like a fire extinguisher. It's something that's good to have, but it's successful even if you don't need to use it every day. I also hope that it will lead to more competition on Visa and MasterCard, bring down merchant service fees, which are exorbitantly high. So just the outside, for economists, is this threat that will enforce equilibrium outcomes. So just the threat of the digital euro will give our retailers bargaining power with Visa and MasterCard to bring these fees down. I think that's a positive thing. It doesn't matter how many people have adopted it for that. With that being said, that's probably not what the central banks would want, right? So if you ask the ECB today, they will say everybody should use the digital euro, and I'm not sure that we have put all the pieces in place to make this a reality. And for me, that's a very open question. What is it that's missing? What's the user story? What is the one thing that would make everybody want it? I don't have an answer for that.
Let's see. Let me just close by saying, I come from the media and broadcast industry. I've done this transformation twice in the music and in the broadcast television business. You can't stop those waves of digitalization. It's not going to work. Yes, there's a state monopoly for money, but we have open society, so there's room for private solutions. Let's just see, and the market can fix it. Thanks a lot for your time. Now we can talk about crypto taxation, but no, just a joke. We agreed,
2 minutes.
We agreed to disagree here. So thanks a lot. I hope there's a good, constructive collaboration in the market going forward, not only between the center and the Blockchain Bundesverband, but also between us here in the room. So please, join courses, become a member, lobby in Brussels, Berlin, and where else it is necessary. Thanks for your time, and of course, we're happy to take questions. I'm sure Stefan has one. Joachim has a question.
Okay, one last question.
It's a fascinating combination of things that you intend to do, and I think you have some basic story. If I go back to my start in crypto, it was basically the hope of something different which might turn better. I mean, let's from a historic perspective not forget that there are 6 weeks between the fall of Lehman Brothers and the Bitcoin white paper. And when I look at educating about all these important technologies and the interplay that you say, specifically blockchain and AI, to what extent do you envisage to give a philosophical meta layer to your work in research and education by basically looking also at the wider dimensions of human-machine interaction, about control, about all these very fundamental trade-offs that you have in any decentralized systems on governance by whom and according to what principles, which I think for students of the young generation are extremely important to see that we're not only talking finance or technology or real-world use case, but that we really talk about principles that actually Socrates and Aristotle have discussed.
Wow, what a question. That's a good final one.
Give me like 10 seconds to answer this. So no, the honest answer is there has been, the history of technology has been shaped by cyber libertarian perspective. And it's the only perspective that has shaped technology successfully. I think we are now at a point where we can think of alternatives, where we can think of collective approaches, collective governance approaches to questions of ownership of data. These things are on the horizon, not just technologically, but from a governance. Think of liquid democracy, think of that. Now we have mechanisms available that we didn't have 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I hope that this combination of new technology, new law, or new ways of governance will inspire students to come up with alternatives to the cyber libertarian doctrine that has dominated for so long.
And if I may add one last sentence, as a political scientist, you know, people often talk about adoption as if the next 5 or 10 years would be normal years. We will have very, very political markets. Many of our foundations will be shaken, and especially in Frankfurt, I don't think this is considered enough in many statements also here today. Back to you, Stefan.